I sat by the window, sunlight spilling across the cream-colored silk of my blouse, the soft hum of the city below a distant reminder that life never waited for anyone's permission. My phone buzzed on the marble countertop, the vibration startling me for a second, and when I picked it up, my heart sank. A group chat notification. Rehearsal dinner tomorrow. Don't forget, the front seats are reserved. The words hit me like they always had, like they had 10 years ago, even if no one would ever know. Too embarrassing. Too awkward. Too loud. My brother's exact words from my teenage years, echoing in my mind with the same sting. I had laughed it off then, forcing smiles while swallowing the humiliation, but now, I was grown, and something inside me shifted. I traced the edge of the silk sleeve with my finger, inhaling the faint scent of lavender from my candle. Life had moved on, but that old familiar itch of vindication crept in. I'd built a quiet empire, one that my family believed was just modest efforts behind a subtle social media life. And now, the invitation wasn't just a reminder, it was a challenge, a chance to rewrite the narrative. A smile tugged at the corner of my lips, ironic, deliberate. They thought I'd crumble in embarrassment. They thought I'd shrink. But this time, I wasn't sitting anywhere quietly. I had a plan, and it started tomorrow. I remember that day like it was etched in glass, sharp and unforgiving. I was 16, perched on the edge of the beige velvet couch in our living room, my hands trembling as I smoothed the skirt of my dress over my knees. The air smelled faintly of my mother's perfume and freshly polished floors, a smell I'd always associated with family gatherings that were supposed to feel safe. But safety was a luxury I had never truly known in that house. "You're too embarrassing to sit up front, Emily," my brother had said, his voice casual, but it cut through me like a knife. Too embarrassing. The words rolled over and over in my mind, each repetition tightening the knot in my throat. I could feel the heat rising to my cheeks as my stomach lurched, a mix of shame and disbelief. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the couch cushions, but I stayed, frozen, because that was all I knew how to do. My hands shook as I gripped the edge of the couch, nails biting into my palms. I wanted to scream, to tell him that I wasn't a joke, that I wasn't a burden. But no sound came. I swallowed hard, the lump lodged in my throat preventing any words from forming. I had learned early that my feelings weren't meant to take up space. That afternoon, after the storm of words had passed, my grandmother came into my room. She didn't scold, didn't lecture. She simply handed me a small, worn notebook, the corners frayed, and whispered, "Your voice matters, Emily. Even if they don't hear it now, it will echo one day. Keep this close." Her words wrapped around me like a warm blanket, a fragile but unwavering lifeline. That night, sitting on my bedroom floor with the notebook open on my lap, I made a silent vow. I would not let their judgments define me. I would not stay small to fit their narrative. Somewhere deep inside, buried beneath hurt and embarrassment, a spark ignited, a determination to rise, to build a life where I could never again be dismissed or overlooked. By the time I climbed into bed, the notebook clutched to my chest, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I was going to stand on my own. I was going to create my own space in the world, a place they couldn't control, a place they couldn't touch. And in that quiet, resolute moment, I began the first chapter of a life that would one day leave them speechless. The first step toward my independence was terrifying. I had the notebook, a few dollars saved, and a stubborn belief that I could make something of myself. My parents thought I was struggling in college, that I would fumble through internships and jobs like I had fumbled through my teenage years. But every day, I proved a little more to myself than to anyone else. I took a job at a small marketing firm, long hours in a cramped office that smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink. I stayed late, my laptop balancing precariously on my knees, and pored over every detail of campaigns, learning how to make words sell, how to shape perception. Nights blurred into mornings, the hum of the fluorescent lights above becoming a lullaby for my relentless ambition. Each email I sent, each presentation I crafted, was a brick in the foundation of the life I was building. It wasn't easy. Self-doubt crept in during the quiet hours. I remembered my brother's words, my grandmother's gentle encouragement, and the sting of every, too embarrassing, remark that had been thrown my way. Some nights, I would look at the notebook on my desk, pages full of ideas, sketches, and reminders, and wonder if I was capable of actually achieving the life I envisioned. But I kept writing, kept learning, kept pushing. Then I met someone who changed everything. Laura Hastings, a seasoned marketing director with a keen eye for talent and a soft spot for perseverance. She saw in me what my family never had: the spark, the determination, the refusal to be dismissed. "Emily," she said on our first project together, "you're not just good, you're going to be exceptional. Don't let anyone make you feel small." That affirmation became a lifeline. Under her mentorship, I began to land bigger clients, craft campaigns that drew attention, and slowly, quietly build a reputation. I learned the art of subtlety. Social media updates painted a picture of modest progress, never revealing the magnitude of my success. I wanted them to assume I was still the girl they had dismissed, still fumbling and ordinary. Meanwhile, I bought my first studio apartment, invested in my own projects, and started earning more than I had ever dreamed. The first time I closed a deal that covered 3 months' rent and more, I cried quietly in my office, laughing at the irony of my former humiliation. Over the years, my empire grew quietly, layer by layer, hidden behind the facade of humility. I bought art I loved, not to impress, but to remind myself of beauty and accomplishment. I surrounded myself with people who challenged me, nurtured me, and believed in me without question. I was no longer the girl who could be embarrassed into silence. I was the woman who had learned to bend the world to her will, without ever needing anyone's approval. And through it all, the notebook remained at my side, a constant reminder that small words of encouragement, a spark of belief, and relentless persistence could change everything. I was no longer invisible. I was unstoppable. The day of the wedding arrived, and I walked into the grand hall with the same calm, measured confidence that had carried me through every late night and early morning. The chandeliers sparkled above, reflecting the polished marble floors, and the hum of conversation and clinking glasses created a symphony that I had learned to navigate with grace. My brother, of course, didn't expect me to be here in this way. He assumed I would sit quietly in the back, invisible as always. How wrong he was. I led him and a few curious family members into my office first. I wanted the reveal to be deliberate, not rushed, letting them see the fruits of years they had ignored. They stepped into a space that was both warm and commanding, walls adorned with abstract paintings I had collected over the years, a sleek mahogany desk with awards neatly arranged, and a few personal touches: the little succulent I had nurtured, photographs of projects that had made headlines, letters of commendation from clients around the country. Their expressions froze, shifting between confusion, disbelief, and something like awe. I leaned against the edge of the desk, letting the silence stretch a moment longer. "Remember when you said I was too embarrassing to sit up front at your wedding?" I asked, voice steady, controlled. Their eyes widened. They remembered. I let a pause linger, just long enough to let the memory sink in. "Well," I continued, a subtle smile tugging at my lips, "this is me. The one you underestimated. The one you thought would never amount to anything." I gestured to the room, to the evidence of my labor. "I am CEO of my own company now. We manage campaigns for Fortune 500 clients. My net worth? Let's just say, it's enough that no one will ever question me again. And this," I tapped the corner of my desk where the notebook my grandmother had given me sat, worn but intact, "is where it all began." My brother's jaw dropped. His hands, which had been loosely folded, tightened. My parents blinked rapidly, attempting to process the woman standing before them. I could see the mix of emotions: shame, astonishment, disbelief, and maybe, just maybe, a flicker of pride. But I wasn't waiting for their reaction. I didn't need it anymore. "You've all been operating under the assumption that I was still struggling, still timid, still embarrassing," I said, letting the words flow with measured force. "And that assumption? It's exactly why I never sought approval from anyone in this room. I built my life, my career, my freedom, quietly, deliberately, without your permission. And now, here it is. The room was silent, heavy with the weight of realization. I watched as my brother's face shifted through shock, guilt, and the first hesitant spark of understanding. My parents, ever so slowly, began to process that the girl they had underestimated, dismissed, and labeled embarrassing had become a force of nature they could no longer ignore. I took a step back, letting my posture radiate the confidence that had been earned through years of struggle, determination, and quiet triumph. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to argue. The truth of my success, the sheer undeniable evidence of my growth, spoke louder than any words could. For the first time, I watched their eyes meet mine not as judges, but as witnesses. And in that moment, I realized I had not just proven them wrong. I had claimed my life, fully, unapologetically, and beautifully. I stood in the center of the room, letting the magnitude of what they were seeing sink in. For years, I had played by their rules, silenced my ambitions, shrunk myself to fit their expectations. But now, the scales had shifted. I wasn't the girl they could dismiss anymore. I was the woman in control, and they would understand that on my terms. "I'm willing to help," I began, my voice calm but unwavering. "But not the way you think. Not the way it used to be when I bent over backward for approval that was never given." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. Eyes darted around the room, some faces pale, some wide-eyed. I could feel the tension in the air like a living thing. "My brother," I said, turning to him, "you need to acknowledge my success without excuses, without jealousy, without trying to diminish it. You can support me, but first, you have to respect the woman I've become. And that starts with humility." I shifted my gaze to my parents, letting them absorb the full force of what I was about to say. "You both must learn that I am not your project. You cannot control my life or my choices. If you want a place in my world, you need to drop the toxic patterns, the constant judgment, and start treating me as an equal. And perhaps most importantly, pursue your own dreams instead of living through mine." The room was quiet except for the subtle hum of the air conditioning. I could see the tension stretching their minds, the way they grappled with the unfamiliar dynamic. I was no longer a child. I was the architect of my own life. I stepped closer to my desk, touching the notebook that had guided me through years of self-doubt and struggle. "This little book," I said softly, almost to myself, "was the beginning of my independence. It reminds me of the power of believing in myself when no one else would. You all have a choice: adapt, grow, and participate in my life meaningfully, or step aside. I won't compromise who I am for comfort or familiarity anymore." Their expressions shifted slowly: hesitation, guilt, reflection. I wasn't cruel, but I was firm. Compassion didn't mean weakness. I wanted them to understand that change was possible, but only if they were willing to meet me halfway. By the time I finished speaking, the room was heavy with thought, contemplation, and the first real flickers of respect. No one had ever set boundaries like this before. No one had demanded change and accountability so openly. And yet, despite the tension, I sensed the potential for something different, a new beginning that wasn't rooted in shame or dismissal, but in acknowledgement, growth, and mutual respect. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just showing them who I had become. I was offering a path for them to evolve too, but on my terms. The power wasn't just mine. It was a shared possibility, if they were willing to meet me where I stood, strong, unapologetic, and finally unshakable. Weeks passed after the confrontation, and something remarkable began to happen. My family started to adjust, not overnight, and not without some awkwardness, but they began to recognize the woman I had always been. My brother, once quick to dismiss, started asking for advice on projects of his own, showing a hesitant but genuine respect. My parents, too, seemed to tread carefully, learning the art of listening without judgment, letting me occupy the space I had carved for myself without interference. I often found myself alone in my office late at night, the the city skyline glittering outside my window, and I would pick up the worn notebook my grandmother had given me all those years ago. The pages were filled with scribbles, reminders, and dreams that had once seemed impossible. Running my fingers over the edges, I smiled, the weight of my journey settling into a quiet, comforting pride. It wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about honoring the strength I had cultivated and the life I had built. I began to notice subtle changes around me, small but profound. My brother's laughter felt less like a critique and more like genuine joy when we worked together. My parents' glances no longer carried impatience or condescension but curiosity and a hint of admiration. Even in moments of tension, I realized that the power I had claimed was not only for myself. It was shaping a new dynamic, one where respect and growth replaced judgment and dismissal. And in the quiet moments, I would remember my grandmother's words. Your voice matters. Even if they don't hear it now, it will echo one day. I had carried that message through late nights of doubt, through small victories and major breakthroughs. Now, standing at the intersection of past and present, I saw that it had come full circle. My voice hadn't just echoed, it had resonated, reshaping the world I had once thought I couldn't command. I leaned back in my chair, breathing in the faint scent of coffee and city air, feeling the glow of accomplishment settle in my chest. I was no longer the girl who shrank in the shadows or waited for permission. I was the woman who had written her own story, set her own rules, and claimed her rightful place in the world. And as I looked out at the skyline, the one-line truth I had carried all these years whispered in my mind, clear and unwavering, I am unstoppable, unapologetic, and finally, completely mine.